Hey, welcome back to Business 163, Personal Finance. Wanted to give you in this fourth video a quick little primer on automobile loans. It's one of the larger purchases that we ever contemplate making on credit, taking out a loan in order to effect the purchase, right? Probably the only other bigger purchase than that would be a home, and we have in the next video some comments about mortgage loans. But in this video, let's talk a little bit about auto loans because, quite frankly, it's one of the biggest purchases we make on consumer credit on an installment loan basis, and there is some debate about it. So let's climb right in. You can see here on the title slide, as we talk about auto loans, let's climb right in. Let's talk about this. Well, one question that comes right up is, well, should I even get an auto loan, right? Well, a lot of that has to do with answering some other questions first. What kind of car do you want? Do you want to buy new or buy a used car? Are you looking primarily for a luxury car or an economy car? What brands are you interested in? And right off the top, right, as we just ask those 5 questions, we realize a lot of this has a lot more to do than just with financial wisdom and financial sobriety. The kinds of cars that we want to select and drive, well, many of us feel that this is tied to more than just our financial wisdom, but to who we are as a person. It is a way to express something about ourselves and demonstrate a sense of style or status or prestige or so, you know, there's a lot of other reasons than just simply non-behavioral choices when we answer these questions. What kind of car do we want to buy? And therefore, while we would never tell you that a personal choice about a car is unwise, we would tell you you have to realize no matter what the answers to those 5 questions are, realize that cars depreciate very quickly. In other words, they lose their value very quickly. Realize, for instance, a new car loses about, on average, 11% of its value the moment you drive it off the dealer's lot. As soon as the rear tires pass over the threshold of its driveway, the driveway of the new car dealer, it loses 11% of its value. You may not even yet know how to adjust the rear view mirrors, and you've just lost 11% of the car value you just paid for. Yeah. In fact, let's go further. During the first 5 years of a car's life, the first 5 years you own that new car, that car is going to lose 15 to 25% of its value every year. Every year depreciates at a rate of 15 to 25% every year. So that at the end of those first 5 years of ownership, the car is going to be worth, on average, only 37% of what you paid for it at the dealership 5 years ago. All right? Now, that should be a very sobering thought, right? When you realize that the automobile loses its value so very quickly, so much of it gone in the first 5 years, then you should really think about the financial implications of taking out a large loan on that car that you're still going to owe for every day of those 5 years while the car is losing value just by sitting in your driveway. Another question that some folks have is, what's all this about leasing a car? What is a car lease? Well, I kind of know what buying a car is, even if I pay cash for the entire car or if I get a loan, but what is a lease? Well, every dealer wants to convince you to lease a car, right? They advertise how wonderful a lease is. And what is a lease? Essentially, you are renting the privilege of using the car without ever owning a single bit of that car. If you think about it conceptually, it's a lot like leasing an apartment, right? If you lease an apartment from a landlord, what are you doing? You are paying rent. You are paying rent for the privilege of using that apartment, but you're not ever going to own any part of that apartment. You're just paying for the monthly usage. That's what a lease of a car is. You're paying for the usage of the car without ever owning it. And quite frankly, you're paying for it subject to some pretty restrictive terms. Automobile leases will typically have mileage limits that you can drive the car. You cannot drive it as far as perhaps you'd like to. You can only drive it within certain limits, or you violate the terms of the lease and will have to pay substantially at the end of the lease. You also promise and covenant to maintain the car in a certain level of condition. And if you let the car get a little ratty, if you have stained upholstery or rips in the upholstery, etc., dents in the vehicle, you may also incur substantial financial penalties at the end of the lease. So there are some pretty restrictive terms you have to adhere to when you lease the car. So having said that right up front, why would anyone consider leasing a car? Well, typically you lease brand new cars, and therefore the advantage is you will have a very nice new car to drive around. And quite frankly, in driving around that new car, you're going to have a lower monthly payment than if you had bought the car, because you're only paying for the usage of the car, not owning it over time. Therefore, leases always have lower monthly payments than if you had bought it. If you want to have a very nice luxury car and you can't afford to buy one, well, this is a way for you to be driving around a very nice luxury car with a substantially lower payment than if you'd bought it. What's the disadvantage? Well, you can sort of already guess. It's a pretty expensive way to rent transportation, and you'll never own a car if you just keep leasing cars, right? So something to think about very, very seriously, right? Are there situations where you absolutely have to have a very nice new luxury car with a very low payment? Wow. It's very difficult to say there would be a time and a context where that is the right financial decision. Again, financial is not the only aspect we're considering when we think about what kind of car and how we want to own it, but just realize from a financial perspective, a lease isn't really a very good deal. All right. So, is an auto loan a quote-unquote bad debt? As we've sort of discussed in our whole discussion in this class about good debts versus bad debts, we had earlier in that discussion defined a bad debt as money owed in order to buy a depreciating asset, an asset that loses value over time. And quite frankly, isn't that what we've just defined? But we would also be remiss to not acknowledge, especially here in Northern California, quite frankly, it's almost impossible to live a normal life without access to a personal automobile. I mean, it's not completely impossible, but man, it's hard, right? Quite frankly, there are some jobs right here in Marin County that you cannot work at if you don't have a personal automobile, because public transit doesn't take you to the doorstep of your workplace. So we have to acknowledge that it's really, really difficult to live your life without a personal automobile. And for many of us, it's really difficult to purchase a personal automobile 100% cash. It's really hard to do that. So we might say that an auto loan is a financial compromise. And so perhaps the smartest way to undertake this financial compromise, if you have no other way to get an automobile other than taking out an auto loan, well, here are some suggestions. Finance as little as you possibly can, which means you're going to be putting down a substantial amount of cash, even if it's not all of the purchase price, right? Also, keep the loan term as short as possible. Wait a minute, that means, Tim, that my monthly payment's going to be higher. Yes, it is. And so you've got to be able to manage that payment, but you want to finance as little as possible for a short amount of time as possible. Which means you might consider buying a car that's already lost a great deal of its upfront depreciation. Maybe a car that's 2 years old, or 3 years old, or 4 years old, or that's 5 years old. Wait a minute, that means I won't be driving a brand new car. Yes, but it does mean you will be taking control of what is admittedly a bit of a financial compromise, taking out a loan for a depreciating asset. Now, you should realize right up front, there are many financial gurus, as I've mentioned before, who will tell you right out of the gates, don't ever get an auto loan. It's a bad debt, the very definition of a bad debt, right? Taking out credit, taking out a loan to pay for a depreciating asset. With all due respect to someone like, for instance, Dave Ramsey, right, who advocates very dogmatically that auto loans are a bad deal, right, we would say, well, there may be another perspective on this, but he's not entirely wrong that it is, a questionable kind of financial compromise if that's the way we want to go. All righty? So take that advice with a good grain of salt, right? And understand your own lifestyle and what you're trying to accomplish before you go in saying, well, I'm just going to take on a great big auto loan over a big long period. So returning to the slide deck, you should realize whenever you go shopping for a car, the entire industry, the entire car sales industry, that whole deck is stacked to get you to think differently than what we're suggesting in this deck. The entire focus of new car sales is to get you to only think about the monthly payment, not about the entire financial obligation you're making. Many times, loan terms can be manipulated to lower the monthly payment, and the salesman will push very hard to convince you, I've just made that car affordable. And you end up paying far more in interest over the life of the loan. For instance, did you realize that the fastest growing loan term in the United States is a 7-year auto loan? Wait a minute. I've just told you earlier, your car's going to lose over 60% of its value in the first 5 years, and yet you're still going to have a car loan for 7 years? Yeah. Realize, whoa, that doesn't make a lot of financial sense to carry the loan out for 7 years, for 84 months. Why are people taking more and more 7-year auto loans? Well, it's because car prices are rising faster than wages are increasing. This is one of the few ways you can get a luxury car affordable for many people, right? And also, don't underestimate the fact that we have drunk the Kool-Aid. We have believed the marketing message that the car you drive defines you. It defines your status, your success, and quite frankly, influences your ability to get a date. I want to put it that way. All right? So, hey, fellas, hey, ladies, there's a way of thinking that says if your date is going to make a decision whether to date you based on the car you drive, maybe you're talking about the wrong person. All right. But realistically, right, with all seriousness, right, this is this is an undertaking you should take only cautiously, right? Do I really want to take out a loan for a depreciating asset? Maybe I have to in order to get a car that I can rely on to haul my kids around and do all those kinds of things. Maybe you have to. But if you do, realize the entire industry is stacked against you, trying to convince you to not think about the entire financial obligation, but to only think in terms of the narrow aspect of just, hey, this beautiful car smells great, shiny, you can afford the monthly payment. But you need to take these other considerations in mind as well. The depreciating value, how quickly a car depreciates in value, right? As well as how long are you going to owe and what's the total amount you actually end up paying for that car over the terms of the loan you're contemplating. Important stuff to consider. Thanks for your attention. We'll see you in the next lecture.